close in our prayers and our loyalty our Holy Father, Pope Francis. Increasingly, it's clear that he is the object of considerable animosity. At each Mass, we pray for him by name. As we do so with our voices, so may we do so also with our hearts. Yes, my brothers and sisters, shame. I wish I could redo everything over these 30 years as a bishop.
Now, that cardinal was revealed to have reassigned priests accused of abusing children rather than taking stronger action. Let's get some more reaction on the story now. I'm joined by our London correspondent, Ollie Barrett. Obviously, Ollie, these sort of actions, claims have been swirling around for years and years and years. What is the response at the moment to what the Pope was supposed to have done or not done?
Well, I think in Ireland, this was a trip from the Pope that really caused mixed emotions in that country. The Pope clearly arrived in Ireland wanting to try and tackle the issue of abuse in Ireland, but also in other areas of the world, either by members of the Catholic Church or the cover-up of that abuse. He wanted to tackle that issue head on and spoke explicitly about it on various occasions, had that meeting with some survivors of abuse as well. But as the Pope left the country, what many people in Ireland were saying was that it was good that the Pope had addressed these matters. It was good that he had spoken about them, asked for forgiveness, talked about the repellent crimes that had been committed. But what many people in Ireland now want to see is action. We actually even heard from the Irish Prime Minister Leo Varadkar speaking in front of the Pope, calling for zero tolerance from the Catholic Church towards any of its priests who are found guilty of either carrying out abuse themselves or being involved in any type of cover-up of that abuse. So really, I think mixed emotions in Ireland. This is a country that has changed hugely in recent years. The last papal visit was by John Paul II back in 1979, when he held a mass in Ireland. Over 1 million people turned up to celebrate it with him. For Pope Francis's mass in Dublin that we saw last month, 135,000 people. And this is a country that's changed in many ways with regards to thinking around issues like abortion, same-sex marriage, lots of ways that the society is moving in perhaps a different way to the Catholic Church itself. So it was interesting to see how that papal visit played out.
And briefly, if you will, I mean, I know that the Church is worried about hemorrhaging people. This obviously can't help, can it?
No, it can't. And, you know, some of those numbers with regards to the people who turned out on the streets in Ireland will certainly have worried the Catholic Church. When you look at the UK, for example, the numbers in terms of the congregations here in Britain have been boosted really in recent years by immigration from parts of Eastern Europe, countries like Poland, which are very, very Catholic. Many of the Polish immigrants to the UK come here and want to join a Catholic Church and worship on Sunday. So that's kept the numbers up a little bit here in the UK, but certainly a worry when those congregations start to dwindle, and when the Pope will have seen just over 100,000 people coming out to celebrate Mass with him compared to those numbers we saw for the previous papal visit.
Okay, Ollie, thank you. Let's go to Uganda now. More than 85% of the population are Christian, with nearly half of that being Catholic. Isabel Nakira joins us from Kampala. Isabel, what has the reaction been there to abuses, the ongoing abuses and the cover-ups?
Thank you. What I can say is that the level of deceit in the Catholic Church in Uganda continues unabated. The number of children that are being born or sad by priests from the Catholic Church are leading a fatherless figure. For example, in Uganda is many of the children that are being born here are born as a result of their young girls, their supposed mothers who approach the Catholic Church for help, and instead they are used. For example, a priest here that wedded last year, he he resigned from the Catholic Church, and by the time he resigned, he already had fathered 3 children from his girlfriend, who actually approached the church for help. One of the fathers here, a priest that came out very strongly to talk about what was happening in the Catholic Church, from that time onwards was dethroned. He was excommunicated, and of course the Archbishop came out very strongly to say that he was stirring hatred into the Catholic Church and spreading wrong messages. But of course, sometime this year he came back ironically and asked for forgiveness from the Catholic Church, and he was welcomed back. But an interesting case that he mentioned in one of the documents that he authored was of a young boy who was serving as an altar boy in a Catholic church here in Kampala, and his father was a priest. But these 2 people could not see eye to eye and pretended that they did not know each other. And of course, there have been cases of splitter groups from the Catholic Church, because many of the priests here are living uncelibate lives. And one of those churches, of course, allows Catholic priests to get married, and they acknowledge divorce as one of their doctrines, as opposed to the Roman Catholic Church. Of course, there have been reactions from that, and the Archbishop, one of the Archbishops, has come out very clearly and strongly and said that these are just isolated cases and should be treated as such, and they should not smear the Catholic Church. But of course, some priests have come out very strongly and also said some of these issues of sexuality and relationships should be treated very realistically and in a practical way. And of course, the Catholic Church here needs, according to them, to go back to the drawing board and look into some of these issues. And
Okay,
of course,
let's leave
if
it there.
maybe rethink or rethink some of these issues.
Okay, thank you, Isabel Nakira. So, what about here in South Africa? How bad is sexual abuse in our churches? I asked Shaheda Omar of the Teddy Bear Clinic, which deals with some of the church's victims.
Just to respond to what the Pope says, I think it's too little, too late. And if we just look at it historically, this is a global phenomenon, but we can also localize it to the South African context. We had the matter, the Kerkhoff matter, where 5 children were involved or victims of sexual abuse by a Catholic priest by the name of Kerkhoff, and that was in 2008. So we're talking about 10 years ago. And these children, each one came with a consistent story about the allegations of sexual abuse by this priest. However, what is interesting that they were referred by SAPS, at the time the Child Protection Unit, for assessments, the competency to testify, whether they were in a position to distinguish between a truth and a lie, and of course a section 213170A to ensure that they would not suffer undue mental stress should they appear in court, and the requisition or request for an intermediary. What was interesting was that there was a lot of support that was provided to the priest. He had the best of the defense counsel. He had more than one advocate. And there was a lot of delay tactics, but each time we were requested and subpoenaed to go to court, but each time there was a tactic. At one point he was ill, another point it was to bring the Teddy Bear Foundation into disrepute, to state that the assessments that were conducted was not conducted by suitably qualified professionals.
Who was supporting him?
Well, that's very interesting. There was a lot of money, and the backing was clearly evident that it was coming from the Catholic Church. They were also, just to bring in the gravity of and the complexity of this funding, the applicant was suing the Minister of Justice, the Minister of Police, the Teddy Bear Foundation as an organization and myself in my professional capacity.
This man who was accused of abusing these boys.
Indeed, and there were 5 children, and what one needs to understand, these children were under the age of 10 years. What would their motive be to create a false allegation? And these children displayed and demonstrated signs of trauma.
Do we know what happened to them?
Well, they were groped, there was humping from the Catholic priest got into their bunks when they were on a camp, and it was more than one child. He took one child, obviously, at a time, but held them and tried to tickle, and of course it was slowly breaking down those barriers, but then wanting to engage in more intimate embracing and humping with the children from the back.
I can't even imagine what the mental trauma must be, the scars, also knowing that you are facing hostility when it comes to those who should be protecting you.
Indeed, and I think I would like to speak more to the issues, not around the hostility that I was facing, because we had to also use senior counsel, and the time, it cost us time, money, it cost us the emotional support and strain that one was subjected to. But I want to focus on the stress and trauma of these young boys. Some of the challenges that emerged was they were struggling at school, their lack and inability to concentrate, and somatizing, where the children were now presenting and manifesting stomach aches, somatic complaints of headaches, just being unwell, and the confusion, the lack of understanding of, why did this happen to them, and by somebody they trusted, a person of the cloth, a clergyman.
What does this say about what is happening in the church then? I assume it's still happening now. And these are children who, as you say, are being abused by somebody who's supposed to look after them. But if the church is surrounding and protecting those abusers, where do you even start?
So it's a very insulated system protecting the victimizers. Saturday I was at a court preparation program in the Soweto region, where one of the mothers during the course of the preparation alluded to the fact that another clergyman had raped her daughter, and that he was out on bail. But what was interesting and shocking and disappointing is that he was being supported by the church. He was getting funding from the church to use the defense counsel to pay towards his legal fees. So once again, we see this perpetuation.
But what does it suggest? That there are a lot of people in the church doing it, that they think it's okay? I mean, what's the message from them when they behave like that?
Well, of course, there's a very strong message conveyed to them that it's okay, and that sexual abuse, as a clergyman, a person of the cloth, somebody from a religious backing or organization, that you can get away with it, that it's kind of normalized, they desensitized to it, but they seem to be getting the license to continue this, because that's the message. Crime, sexual abuse or sexual offenses pays.
And would potential pedophiles or pedophiles look to the church as a job, a life career, because they know they can do what they want?
Thank you for asking that question, Jane, because we often find that pedophiles, your preferential abusers, your career abusers, are going to gravitate to these kind of settings because they are so well protected, and they know they will be protected. Because if one looks at the incidence and prevalence and the historical progression of pedophiles in these settings, they get away with these kind of criminal offenses.
So what needs to be done in order to put a stop to this, and now?
Well, I think, we've been talking about criminal vetting, psychometric testing, that even people in the church need to be screened.
Because this Kirkenhoff, excuse me interrupting, he didn't even have his papers checked when he came to South Africa, did he?
Indeed.
They knew that he was behaving like this in Germany.
Well, they actually passed the problem to South Africa. There was evidence there, and then he was sent off to South Africa. And what did South Africa do? They extradited him back to Germany, and then after a lengthy period of time, he was convicted because he was found guilty of more than 300 sexual offenses. So, I mean, this is shocking, but I think this is what we need to take cognizance of. We need to ensure that people are thoroughly screened. Going for police clearance means absolutely nothing. I think that is what we need to be very aware of, because these people operate on a very sophisticated level, so they're not going to have a track record where there's convictions or arrests made. So we need more stringent and rigorous procedures of profiling, screening, and of course there needs to be internal and external, because the church has its own internal screening and internal disciplinary processes, which is not objective. If we look at the Kerkhoff matter, it's a tip of the iceberg. We look at things globally, we see that the internal processes are very subjective, very biased, and in favor of the clergyman.
So these groups, these churches, which are supposed to hold the moral high ground, really need to clean up their act.
Indeed, and I think if we look at it's a cycle, it's actually an intergenerational pattern of sexual violence, because it's not a new phenomenon, but if we go back in time, it's been evident historically over the ages.
That was Teddy Bear Clinic's Shahida Omar. Well, our lines are open and you can get in touch with us if you want to ask my guest any questions. It's Father Russell Pollitt with the Jesuit Institute. Thank you very much for joining us.
Sure, thank you.
Harrowing tales. I don't even know where you start. How widespread is it here in South Africa? What sort of stories are you hearing?
Yeah, we've had cases, as the Kirchhoff one you've just heard about, and there have been other cases as well. You know, how widespread it is, do any of us know? The ongoing revelations are shocking, and one suddenly starts to think to yourself, you know, this is much bigger than simply just isolated cases, as somebody else said earlier on in one of the interviews, I think from Uganda. There's something here that we really ought to be looking at, because this is disgusting, and we cannot continue to go on the trajectory that we are. Something has to happen now.
And what should be looked at? What do you think it is?
So for me, I think there's a number of things. You know, so they were talking, for example, there about screening and so forth. Yes, people are sent for screening before they even enter a seminary. They're sent to psychological testing. You know, they're monitored over the years in the seminary, but people still seem to get through, and this still seems to happen. So clearly that in itself is not working either. I think there's a systemic problem in the church, which is much deeper than simply just the sexual abuse. And that's this very strange combination of power and sexuality and celibacy. And I think if we're going to deal with this issue adequately, we can put whatever legal procedures we want in place or whatever protocols, they are not in the end of the day going to help. We have to do a thorough assessment of ourselves, a self-evaluation, and say there's something systemically wrong in the system that we need to critique.
And is it, other than those points that you made, is it anachronistic in the sense that, you know, so little has changed? I mean, should marriage be introduced? Should it be liberalized more? Should there be changes in that direction?
Well, I think there needs to be a real listening, for example, to science, to modern medicine. We are continually understanding human sexuality as it develops. I mean, one's looking at these gender debates that are going on all over the place. It seems as if the church stopped thinking about issues around sexuality a long time ago. You know, and we can no longer do that. We need to engage much better, I think.
Okay, just hold it there for a moment, if you don't mind. We've got Quentin on the line from Durban. Go ahead, Quentin.
Hello, my name is Quentin. I'd just like to tell you about the Catholic Church. I was brought up in the Catholic Church from a little boy of about 3 years old, with my parents were alcoholics, mother and father, and so we were sent to Nazareth House in Durban, where the nuns used to look after us. And the stories I've got to tell, I can't just tell you now, but the thing is, you've got my telephone number. But one instance I will tell you is that the prefects were about 17-year-old boys that used to look after us while the nuns were, and the priests were doing whatever they had to do. And they were sitting in a semicircle, all in chairs, all in about a 10-meter semicircle. And the one prefect had scissors in his hand, and he said, all abuse, anybody who brings is going to get the scissors in their head. So we're always opening up our eyes, you know what I mean? We're too scared to blink. The next minute I see the prefect throw, so I turn my head away because, you know, I know what, you know, instinct as a little boy. The next minute my friend next door starts screaming, and I looked up into his head, and there the scissors were stuck in his head and through the eye. So, you know, that's just one of the little things that happened in the Catholic Church at Nazareth House.
Okay.
And I've got plenty other things to tell you, but,
Okay,
you know,
let's just mull on that one, Quinton. Thank you very much, and thanks for sharing your story with us. I mean, obviously just not sexual abuses. I mean, do you find that one sort of abuse leads to another if it's uncontained, as clearly it is?
Yes, and I think abusive personalities per se, you know, you are going to, you know, very often one does see, for example, someone who's got a problem with maybe alcohol or drugs, and then there's sex abuse. I mean, these things do, I think, very often develop into each other.
But, all right, you're highlighting some of the problems why we've possibly got there, but surely you must know, as, you know, a man of the church, you must know that something's going on. How can you not know that so-and-so is abusing boys? Is there a culture of silence?
There is a culture of silence, and I think we need to address that as well. For example, just in the last couple of days, you know, people have, I wrote a piece for the Daily Maverick in which I said in the church there is a culture of silence. And a number of people, clergy, have sent me messages saying, you're absolutely right. And one said to me, I don't have the courage to say this, but we need to break this culture of silence. And it's not just simply about sex abuse. I mean, there's a number of other things as well. So there is a very strong, I think, culture of silence that needs to also be interrogated.
Well, what's the fear that stops people from talking?
So, for me, it's about power, I think, and this is a theory. I mean, I'm not, you know, this is my thinking on the thing. So, you know, if you want to climb, so to speak, the ecclesial ladder, right, you have to behave in a certain way, you have to do certain things. So people, therefore, are, so to speak, looking over their shoulder the whole time. And they are, you know, you have to say the right things, be in the right places, be seen to be doing the
And if it does come out that the Pope had covered up, then you can possibly see that that might prevent his ascent to the top?
Yeah, well, if you see a priest is in trouble, or a priest has not, you know, got any questions about him, he's certainly not going to be made a bishop. You know, they want people that are going to say, yes, we agree with the system, we toe the line, whatever line, you know, it is. The story with the Pope, I mean, as well, how does one know if he's covered anything up? I mean, there seems to be a much bigger political thing playing out that some of Francis's opponents are trying to bring him down with this. But I would say, you know, Pope Francis needs to be investigated if this is the case. So does Pope Benedict, and so does John Paul II before him. Let's play open cards here, and let's investigate everybody and say who knew what.
Do it properly. Let's bring in Father James Palmer from Mpumalanga. Go ahead, Father.
Good evening, Jane. How are you?
Good evening. Good, thank you.
I'd like to just throw a spanner in the works. It's all fair and well to focus on one faith community, on one group, and then we sort of like cast a blind eye on the other groups that have these ridiculous rules where you need a two-witness rule with reporting abuse cases that go unchecked for decades. So if we can maybe focus on them as well. You know, because we, also Alma, also fail Vasgoed, you know. We all have those small and skeletons in the back, and then we actually need to deal with them.
Okay, thank you. What's your response?
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I think in other faith communities, so for example, somebody in an interview earlier was talking about celibacy and questions around that. Well, there are faith communities where ministers get married, they've got children themselves, they've got wives, and they've also been held up for abuse. You know, so it does happen in other faith communities. We know it happens in families. We know it happens in broader society. But I don't think it's okay to say, well, it happens everywhere else and we should check at them. We need to say, you know, we need to face what we need to face. It's not okay just because it happens everywhere else to say, oh, well, it's just like the statistics everywhere else. I think people do expect better from us, and they should expect better from us.
Well, they go to you for safety, you would
Yes, exactly.
You would think.
Exactly.
Okay, so there's a massive problem. What can be done now? I mean, if nobody inside the church is willing, those who are complicit, I mean, how do you expose them? How do you get rid of them?
I think that there are people that are willing. So I think what has happened, for example, in the States and the church all over the world talking about this, where victims themselves are coming forward, where people who are not clergy, not ordained, are being put. For example, here in South Africa, the bishops have a protocol where it's not necessarily ordained people that are contact people to say if anything has happened, you need to contact that person immediately. I mean, I think we need to expose this. We need to really know what's going on, and we the church is messed up, and we need to admit that.
Let's bring in Munya from Rustenburg. Go ahead, Munya.
Yes, how are you?
Good, thank you. What's your question?
Good. My thing is, I don't know whether it's in support or not in support. My thing is, if you look at cases that happen with the priest, so it's one priest, he has got a flock of 1,000 people. I was saying 900 of them believe him. They don't know his personal life. 100 of them, maybe 5 of them might know his personal life. So they know probably the sexual abuse. So if you come out and talk about his sexual abuse to the 900, probably these people won't believe, and they won't even if you bring in the evidence, they won't believe all that.
Okay.
You understand now?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
this is where that lady was saying now, the church supports the priest. The church does not support the priest. The church supports his behavior for the past 10 years. The things that he does in private, which come out maybe after 3 years or 4 years or 5 years, are difficult to prove. Now, if it's a criminal act and there should be proof.
Okay, all right.
And
Actually, I'm
those-
going to pick up on your point about a criminal act. I mean, this is a criminal act.
Yes, absolutely.
And yet, the police are never pulled in. It's always an internal investigation. I mean, there's a fault.
Yes, it is. I mean, here in South Africa, for example, the protocol of the bishops' conference is that if there is an allegation, the person is asked to go to the police. If they don't, an official from the church has to go to the police, and it has to be reported. But in some places, that hasn't happened. But I want to pick up on that thing as well about people being complicit, because that's also something which I think we need to throw out there.
Yeah.
The case you mentioned with Kirchhoff earlier, it split a community because half of the community supported him and I think supported the legal fees, and the other half obviously said, this man is guilty. So, and I think that film in 2002 from the Boston Globe, Spotlight, brings that out pretty powerfully, that it was the media, the church, the legal fraternity, everybody was complicit. People knew, but they did nothing.
And that's extraordinary. That's what makes it so frightening.
Exactly. And so therefore, I think in as much as we need to be very hard on the church as the institution, we need to say to people as well, in the church, you also have some responsibility to bear. The days maybe of saying, well, we can't say anything bad about the priest, these are over. We need to be honest.
And something like Kirchhoff, when there's a problem, many priests just get moved to another country, another part of the world, to get rid of that problem.
Yeah, the Kirchhoff
don't
case
stop
was
him doing what he wants.
The Kirchhoff case was a bit of a strange one, because I know he actually came from Germany, and afterwards it was discovered that the authorities there, the bishop there, did not notify South Africa when he came that there were questions about him already. But South Africa should have asked for a letter. I mean, these days, if I travel anywhere, I've got to take a letter to say that I'm a priest in good standing. So these kinds of things are important as well. But the whole community needs to start to say, we are no longer going to put up with this. It can't just be the institution, because we see the institution has not managed to do anything about this since 2002, for example.
I know. It's time, Father. Thank you very much. That's our show for tonight. News is next.